everybody. I'm Meredith Jones. David and I, we're both financial planners on the SLP Wealth team, and we do profession-specific planning focusing on veterinarians. We are also student loan consultants for Student Loan Planner. And so a little bit about me, I'm a veterinarian. My background is I worked as an emergency vet for a long time, like over 12 years past my internship. And some of you may know me from the Debt Free Vets Facebook group or the Vet Financial Summit. I am very excited to introduce David Azis, who is a mortgage loan officer. He has spent years helping people buy houses, and he works with me on the veterinarian team at SLP Wealth, and he is going to give us the inside scoop on home buying. So, David, take it away.
Yep. And just a little bit more background about me too. Before I was a mortgage loan officer, I was a commercial real estate appraiser for about 3 years, then a mortgage loan officer for 3 years, and still a mortgage loan officer, but also now working as a financial planner on the vet team with Meredith, as well as student loan consult on the SLP side. So man of many hats. And my wife, the reason I am on the vet team with Meredith is wife is a veterinarian. I think you guys are the most underappreciated group of people on the face of the earth. And there's lots of opportunities that you have that are unique to being vets. And there's also some hurdles that are unique to being vets too. And it all plays into student loans, and it all plays into even your strategies on how to buy a home. And so I've done over 100 transactions. On the mortgage loan side. And I've also bought for myself and my wife, navigating between, doctor, physician, vet loan versus conventional versus how to buy in a market like this. We bought our first home last year. So I think I have some unique perspectives on how to buy a home through the lens of specifically unique opportunities and pitfalls to look out for with buying a home and being a vet. So let's take it away. And I'll try to get through this not fairly fast because I want to leave some time at the end for some Q&A because I think that's where a lot of the value is going to be had too. But let's get to it. And if you were part of the first home buying webinar that we did, I think it was almost 3 months ago, some of this might look familiar. 80% of this is new though, and tailored to specifically being a veterinarian. But let's get one of the things that is ubiquitous, is universal to whether you're a vet or not. Buying a home is really stressful. And maybe it's because I'm a loan officer, so I've seen how everything can go sideways a million different times before. But when I was buying for myself and my wife, it was the most stressful thing ever, right? But it's also a lot of fun. And now going through it for myself, the things that I would just say is that helped us and made it okay, all go well in the end, super smoothly, and ending up with a home that we really love, even in this crazy market, is just be prepared ahead of time. And attending webinars like this is one of the things to do. So you guys are already on track to be prepared. And the biggest thing in the home buying process is you need to pick your A team. What I mean by that is, well, you need to get a really good realtor, and you need to get a really good LO, which means loan officer, lender, whatever you want to call them, the person doing your mortgage, right? Those are, make sure that your lender, your your spouse, and your realtor all get along. They all know each other, and that they're all experts, because they're going to have your back, and they're going to make sure that things get done when they need to get done. And you just want to set the right expectations up front. It's okay to fall in love 10 times with different homes, imagining yourself in the right place for years to come, only for it to not get your offer accepted, only to go under contract to you get the home inspection back, and then it turns out there's an uh-oh that wasn't known prior to negotiations. And if you can't negotiate it out of the way, maybe you keep on looking, right? You move on to the next deal. It's okay. It's going to be stressful. At the end of the day, it's just a numbers game. In this market, depending on where you're at, I'm here in San Diego. If you're in the Midwest, it's a little bit different. If you're in New York, it's different, but it's hard for everybody right now. And I think just keeping the right mindset of it is a numbers game. It's like sales, you know. If you're a really strong offer, if you've done your homework, if you get the right loan, if you get the right people behind you, maybe there's a 20% chance of you getting your offer accepted, and maybe you need to see 20 properties. Um, before you know what you really like in a home, right? And so you go see 20 properties, then you're ready to start making offers. And then maybe, you have a 20% again likelihood of getting your offer accepted. That means you got to go make 5 offers to get one accepted and fall in love 5 times right there, right? Oh, okay. Then you get one accepted, and then something goes wrong, and it's not worth it to complete the transaction for you. So you need to keep on looking and get 5 more offers and to get another one accepted. So you fell in love 10 times, got your heart broken, 9 times. And then you find the right home. And that might be over the course of 4 to 6 months if you're doing it right. And that's okay. That process that I just explained is normal. And that's how you protect yourself. And that's how you find the right deal. What you don't want to do is lose out on the first deal because a cash offer beats you. You think life is over, and then you give up. That's how you not win the deal. And then the other thing is, well, maybe you get that first offer accepted and then you feel like you need to complete the transaction, but then the home inspection comes up and there's a 20 grand, uh-oh, and it turns out you rush to buy on a busy street that really isn't fitting your needs, but you really feel like you're pressured to finish the transaction. You shouldn't do that either. That's how you get stuck with a property that costs you money. It doesn't make you money, right? And so keep that level head on and just know it's a numbers game and be patient. So how to pick your LO, right? Because what are you looking for? The first thing is trust, meaning, do you have their cell phone? Do they respond to you? And if they don't respond to you instantly, do they say, oh, it's because I'm on the phone, let me call you right back, right? Or do you have to wait in a phone tree with the lender for 30 minutes just to get their voicemail, right? And are they willing to work on weekends for you? It's a tough business, but you're not a pro LO unless you're willing to take calls, answer questions on the weekend, because that's when you're going to be working with your realtor to make offers, right? So they need to communicate with your realtor, your loan officer, while you're looking for properties. And so trust, making like if you don't want to sit down and have dinner with them and trust them to know your financial needs, wants, and goals more than anybody, they're probably not a good fit. So that's really what you're looking for, is how comfortable are you working with them. Are they hungry? That just means, hey, if they've been in the business for 30 years, they might have the experience, but if they're not willing to work for your business because you know they're getting ready to retire, or they're set in their ways, or they're not in growth mode, if something goes sideways, they might not be as motivated to work for you as someone who's 5 years in the business, who knows what they're doing, but they're in growth mode, right? So just keep that in mind. And of course, their knowledge base does matter, their knowledge of different loan products, their rates, all that kind of stuff. But that is secondary to number one and number two. Educator, you know, at least for me, I want someone who can teach me, right? Why are we doing what we're doing? And transparency. It's all very important. And I already touched on response time. So it's really trust is 99% of it. The other 0.9% is ability to answer your questions, teach you, and be transparent. And then the other 0.1% is anything else. Trust is the big thing. Now let's get into some veterinary specific stuff. Why you guys are here. It is buying a home is different for vets. It just is. And it's better in a lot of ways. One thing that could be better about it is the famous doctor mortgage, right? Now, just heads up, this presentation is not how doctor physician loans work. It's not, for a couple reasons. One, it's less important than you think. Two, you may or may not have access to it because it's not like a conventional Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or sorry, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae product, right? It's not an FHA loan. It's not a VA loan. Those are all the types of loans that every single lender should have. and they all kind of work the same no matter what lender you go with. Um, Physician loans, it's kind of 50-50 shot whether they're going to offer them to a veterinarian. Unfortunately, some lenders do, some lenders don't. And whether particular lenders offer them changes by the week and the market. It's a specialized mortgage product that comes into existence and leaves existence for veterinarians. So you might have access to it, you might not have access to it. When it comes time to research for a good LO, um, ask about it. But it's also not the focus of this presentation because even if you do have access to it, which is awesome, it might not be the right loan fit for you. Part of the loan process is finding out with your trusted loan officer advisor, who should know a thing or two about personal finance, right? Is making sure they tailor your loan to meet your financial needs, wants, and goals, right? It's not just putting your numbers into a computer and popping out a conventional loan. It's not. You can structure a loan 1,000 different ways, and at least I always tried to structure my loans to meet your financial needs, wants, and goals, regardless of the mortgage product. Picking it is important though. Um, my wife actually did have the ability to do a doctor loan. I did some research on it. I found a really good LO who, was a very straight shooter with me. We strategically chose not to use it because sometimes it doesn't make sense. The benefits of it, 0 down, up to $1 million, typically. Okay, $1 million purchase price. Anything above that, even if you have perfect credit, typically at least 5 to 10% down. Which is very similar to how a conventional works, by the way. So basically, before $1 million, it could be a great option. If you're in San Diego, if you're in New York, if you're in LA, if you're in the Bay Area, it might not be as good as people think it is. It just kind of turns into a slightly worse conventional because there is no PMI, that thing, that extra cost that people talk about, but the rate's usually higher. So it doesn't matter. So it's not for everyone. If you're in a purchase price range under $1 million, just as a rule of thumb to take away from this presentation, I would look into it, but just make sure they're structuring it to meet your financial needs, wants, and goals. If you're looking at a purchase price over $1 million, it can sometimes make sense, but depending on how much you're putting down at that point, because at that point you're gonna have to put something down anyway, it might not make sense. So just keep that $1 million purchase price in the back of your head.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So I know you just talked about, so no PMI for a doctor loan, right? Can you explain PMI and kind of how that works?
Sure. PMI stands for private mortgage insurance. If we're talking an FHA loan, it's called MI, so mortgage insurance. It's this extra thing in your monthly payment, right? So your monthly payment is made up of principal, interest. That's your mortgage payment, by the way. Yes, you can include taxes and insurance in it if you want to. Sometimes you have to, sometimes you don't. But either way, that's the taxes and insurance doesn't have to do with your rate or mortgage product or whatever. That's stuff that you'd pay even if you didn't get a mortgage and you bought something outright in cash, right? So the mortgage payment is really just that principal and interest. Now, if you put less than 20% down on a conventional mortgage, there's this extra part of the mortgage payment that's usually between $50 to $500 per month, depending on the loan size. It's a percent of the loan size, and it has to do with your credit score too. That they tag on to the mortgage payment to make it, and so it's more makes the mortgage payment higher, right? The purpose of it is, oh, you're seen as a more risky borrower in the lines of in the eyes of a lender, and so they tag on this insurance cost for them in case you default. That's actually what it is. It is an extra cost to you. Sometimes it could only be, again, $50 a month anyway if you have good credit. So I wouldn't put a common newbie mistake is putting 50, 100, $150,000 more down for the sole purpose of getting rid of PMI on the conventional side. If PMI was only going to be $50 per month anyway, was it worth not maxing out your 401k? Was it worth not doing backdoor Roth that year? Was it XYZ, whatever, right? Probably not. So PMI, it is sometimes a no big deal. Sometimes it could be if you have poor credit. Um, Everybody on the doctor loan loves that there is no PMI, even if you put 5% down, even if you put 0% down. The problem that not that, and it's a marketing thing, right? It sounds good, but it doesn't matter if there's no PMI if the interest rate is 1% higher, right? Because maybe with PMI, the payment with a 7% rate for your property is $3,000 a month. Well, without PMI with the same rate, maybe it's 2,700 a month. But with the doctor loan, it might be a higher rate, 7.5%. Now the payment's 3,200 a month. So the payment could actually sometimes be higher without PMI than with PMI. It all depends. Anyway, that was so I'll get off my soapbox on PMI, but that does that answer the question?
Yes, yes, thank you. One other question about doctor loans. Caitlin's asking, she's asking about whether doctor loans have fixed rates, or whether they're always variable.
They can be fixed rates. Sometimes they could be variable. I would say 99% of what anybody's getting today, regardless of the loan type, doctor loan, VA loan, FHA loan, conventional, 99% of loans out there right now are going to be fixed. Um, Most of the time it doesn't make sense to do a variable right now, but I'll get if I'll get into that at the end if we have time, if we want. But short answer, doctor loans can be fixed.
Cool.
They can be variable if it makes sense. Um, let's see here. Associate vets. While you're getting ready to buy a home, something that almost no one would think about. And most lenders wouldn't even think about this unless they knew how veterinarians pay works. And by associate vets, I mean you're an employee. You work for some hospital, you work for some company. And most of you might have heard or know of the term ProSal, right? For a lot of associate or employee vets who are not doing relief, who are not owning their own business, ProSal is the predominant pay structure, right? And basically, you get a guaranteed base and a production component to your pay, right? And if you produce enough revenue, usually it's 20 to 25%, usually 22, 23%. That you'll get. And if that 23%, whatever is in your contract of the revenue that qualifies is greater than your base, well, then you get that instead, right? And so it always looks like you have a base and some type of bonus component if you're producing enough. And so why am I talking about this? And why would this just went over every LO and other financial planner who doesn't know anything about veterinarians pay? Is it matters in the loan process because a lot of especially newer grads, um, they really like to be conservative on that base part, meaning if given the choice, they will choose to keep the base component of their pay lower so that there is a greater likelihood of them getting a bonus, or rather, there's a lower likelihood of them falling short of what's required to meet that base. And I see where you're coming from, but most of the time, especially if you're in a busy practice, you're hitting that base and you're hitting production. And this matters for buying a home and qualifying for a mortgage because most underwriters have no idea what ProSal is or what your bonus means on your pay stub. Every practice even makes their pay stubs look different. Some of them straight up say production, and some of them say DVCM, some acronym that doesn't even make any sense. I've seen it all. Um, and well, think about it from an underwriting standpoint. The base part of your pay is really easy to see and calculate and qualify for qualifying for a mortgage. The production part isn't. Depending on the loan type, you might have to get year-end pay stubs for all employees or for all employers the past couple years which might be tough to dig up if you've changed practices a few different times, which I know is very common, especially in the first few years of practicing. And depending on the lender and how strict they are and how they're feeling that day, they might literally ask you to reach out to the HR person from the practice you used to work for a year and a half ago, and you haven't talked to that HR person for the past year and a half to get them to fill something called a WVOE, which is called Written Verification of Employment, which you don't know how it's supposed to be filled out. They don't know how it's supposed to be filled out, and they can kill your loan. And now they can't use that production component of your income. And so the whole spiel of this is to say, when you're thinking about negotiating your contracts with your employer, or when it's coming time to get raises or whatever, or reevaluate what your base should be, if you're always hitting production every single time by thousands of dollars, and you can't even remember the last time you didn't hit production numbers, it would probably make sense to, before you start any mortgage process, let them know you're trying to buy a home eventually, raise your base so it's still maybe lower than what your average production is, if possible. So that way it's no more cost to your employer, right? They don't care whether it's base plus production, or they just care how much they're getting paid, right? And so if you keep your base lower than your production, but you raise it from the floor that a lot of vets try to keep it at, so raise it from here to here, so the employer doesn't care, but your base is technically higher now, it is easier to qualify for a home. Less complications, less docs they're going to ask for, and it'll make your life easy. So and I literally did that for myself and my wife. We on purpose told the lender to not use a portion of her production income because they defaulted to trying to qualify it. And they were going to send my wife on a wild goose chase that I explained earlier of, contact that HR person from a year and a half ago and try to get that weird form signed. Ugh. When you're under contract, that's really stressful, right? So I'll get off my soapbox. That's just to say, associate vets, don't um, don't keep your base lower than it needs to be. Basically, it's not helping you. And from a financial planning standpoint too, Meredith can talk about this later, it is easier to budget anyway. Relief vets, the thing to keep in mind. Well, relief vets, practice owners, anybody who's not an employee, and I'm looking at you S corp owners too. You're not an employee, even though you pay yourself a W-2. You're a business owner, and your income works differently. And all I'll say on this, because I don't want to take up too much time on this slide, is that your income is not what you think it is. Your income isn't what your LO probably thinks it is either. They're going to go off tax returns depending on how long you're in business, depending on if you're an S corp or not. Like, it gets really complicated, and just know that going into the process. And find a loan officer, a lender, and a realtor who understands the complexities of it. That's really it. What can you control? Don't wait until the day you decide you want to buy a home. Just know in the back of your head, a lot of the tax strategies and student loan strategies, even of being an S corp, of being an independent contractor, of being a business owner, is to write off legally as much as you possibly can to save on taxes, which would also lower the future student loan payment. But you have to balance that if you're trying to buy a home, because if you write off everything that you possibly could, well, now that does lower the amount of income that they could use to qualify you to buy a home. So so for those relief vets, for those um practice owners, even if you're a traveling surgeon, right? For those business owners, if you're trying to buy a home, get with a professional who can tell you, oh, if you write off this much, you should be okay. But if you write off this much, now we're in trouble, right? So it is a balancing act, and just keep that. And a lot of that is beyond the scope of this presentation, but the action item there is just be aware of it and get with a pro who can walk you through it before, 6+ months, a year plus, 2 years before you need to close, right? Pre-approval. This is a slide from the last presentation. I won't spend too much time on it for time's sake. And because I do want to get to all of your questions in the Q&A at the end. But just know when you get the pre-approval, a lot of people think that a pre-approval is like an ironclad doc that's, once you got that, you're ready to close, right? The loan's done. That's not true. All a pre-approval is, even if they wrote, which they should, put it through the automated underwriting system to kick out an approval from Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. All a pre-approval is some LO's judgment call that you will qualify for the loan when you need to at X purchase price with Y amount down at some interest rate. So it's an opinion. So that's very dangerous. What if you just get a salesperson on the line who, they want to tell you what you want to hear, and so they'll kick out a pre-approval. They know you're shopping around, so maybe you don't even use them anyway, and they think you're wasting their time, and so they give you a pre-approval out. They spend 5 minutes on it. They don't ask you for all the needed pay stubs. They don't know how to qualify your pro-sale bonus income. They don't know. They don't read through your credit score or your credit report. They just look at the score. They don't ask you for your assets, bank statements, and actually read through it, right? Takes at least, a day for me to do an ironclad pre-approval of analysis. And not everybody does that. And so if you just get a pre-approval from a noob lender that didn't do their homework, that's a recipe for disaster. That's how you go get under contract. You have money on the line now. You spend money on home inspections and appraisals and time, and you get your hopes up. And then, or worst case scenario, you end your lease while you're under contract, thinking everything's good. And then 2 days before close, there's a debt to income problem. There's a X, Y, and Z problem that they can't really explain to you, right? Meaning, get a pre-approval from someone you trust who you think knows a thing or two about personal finance and is not just a salesperson, because the last thing you want is to break your lease, to spend money on a transaction, to find out it's not going to close. Worst case scenario, and I have actually seen it happen, is someone almost ends up homeless or does end up technically homeless. And then they got to go find another lease and spend 10 grand. And it gets really expensive. So that's that. I'll get off my soapbox there. This is another thing that just applies to everyone, not just vets. Debt to income. A lot of people, think that the credit score is like the biggest deal ever. If your credit score is over one credit, you have 3 credit scores, you actually have like 20, and for different types of things like applying for a credit card, applying for an auto loan, and applying for a mortgage. You have 3 different mortgage credit scores: TransUnion, Equifax, Experian. They'll take the middle one. If you have 2 borrowers, they'll take the middle of the lower 2. And anything over 740 doesn't really matter anymore. Whether you have an 800 or a 740, it's all the same rates basically. Sometimes 760. Even over anything over 700 is generally pretty good. And that might impact your rate by 1/8% sometimes. What's the really thing that matters is your debt to income ratio, which is your monthly debt obligations, right? Let's say minimum credit card payments, auto loans, minimum monthly payments on any auto loans. Student loans is a whole thing. I'll get into that later, but just add up all the minimum monthly payments that show up on your credit report, plus the proposed mortgage payment that you're going for the home that you want. Smack that all together and divide it by your gross, so pre-tax income. That ratio needs to be under, in most cases, 50%. And keep in mind, it's different from a financial planning standpoint than a mortgage standpoint. What I mean by that is, well, you always hear about like, we want to keep your housing ratio under 30% or whatever, and that's true. But in a lot of cases, like, again, depending on how they look at your business income, depending on how they actually do the math on your production income, your LO knows whether that, like, what that means even, right? it's qualifying income. And so if you get a lender or a loan officer who doesn't understand how to calculate your income correctly, your debt to income ratio might be higher than it actually is, and you lose the home when you shouldn't, or they think it's lower than it actually is, meaning because of some weird mortgage guideline, sure, your financial planner and LO might think you're at a 35%, but it turns out we need 2 years work history on this one type of income, and we only got a year that we could prove on paper, and therefore, DTI's 55%, deal's dead, and you lost your 20 grand earnest money deposit. The whole point of this and the action item is just know that debt to income is way more important than credit. Just pay your bills on time. We can talk about credit questions at the end if we have time. But it's just, this is the thing that kills most deals. And then funny, we put this picture here because corgis seem to be mean in my experience. And so they're the equivalent of DTI, is an angry corgi that you need to sedate.
Oh no, David. He's labeling breeds here. Not that we didn't do a little bit of that earlier, but
Sorry to anybody who has a corgi. My old roommate used to have corgis, so nothing against corgis. We just thought this was funny. I'll answer one question right now that I just saw, because does pertain to that. How do you find a good LO in your area? Number one, I'd recommend wow, somebody has the same experience with corgis. To find the good LO, there's no magic way to find it. You're just gonna have to do some homework. Some tips and tricks. If you have any veterinarians that fellow vets, whether at your work or other practices, like vets know other vets, right? If they bought a home in the last couple years, and they have good things to say about their LO, they're like, yeah, worked with David, love him. I'd call him up right now to talk to him. Everything was fine. Everything was easy. If they have nothing but good things to say about the LO that they used, that's probably someone you want to give a call to interview to see if you like them. So first, fellow vets. Second, friends and family who've also bought in the last couple of years. See who they used, and then of course, do a Google search in your area, see if they have good reviews, all that good stuff. But you're gonna, I would want to talk. I would want you to talk with at least 2 or 3 different loan officers, and we'll get to the realtor part in a second, but you got to go with your gut at the end of the day too. So hope that answers the question. So how to pick your realtor? A lot of the same things. We wanted to, it's all about trust. It's all about hunger to help you, their knowledge base. Will they teach you? It's really, you're looking for a lot of the same things. And I'm going to say 99% is that trust factor. Do you feel comfortable talking with them? Do you feel comfortable calling them at any point? Obviously, you don't want to call them at 12 o'clock at night. But like, would you, if stuff hit the fan, right? That's my point. Now, number 7 here on this slide, I want to talk about that for a second. Should you use a realtor at all? New versus pro, the vet trap. What do I mean by that? Exactly. Would you have a beverage with them? A lot of people, this isn't just vets too. A lot of people think they don't need a realtor. Here's my opinion on that. And note, I'm not a realtor. Unless you've bought, let's say you are a realtor. If you're a realtor, unless you've done, over 20 transactions, right? You don't really know anything about anything when it comes to real estate. Same thing on the loan side, unless you've done 25 loans before. Like you don't know anything about being an LO. Period, end of story. You're still a noob. And that's in the business. Now, Matt, so take that now. And are you an expert on something that you've never done before? Or if you're already bought 1 or 2 properties, are you an expert on it? I would argue absolutely not, right? Are you an expert on a certain surgery just because you saw someone do it once? Probably not. So the point is you don't know what you don't know. There's no data to support that you're going to get a better purchase price from not using a realtor. And on the buy side, at least, you know, to be decided in light of this NAR commission lawsuit, that's a whole other can of worms. But typically, you don't pay for it anyway. The seller does, and that's probably still going to continue. Either way, there's no data to support that you get a better deal if you don't use a realtor. There's plenty of data to support that if you don't use one and something goes wrong in the transaction, you're going to lose a lot of money. And you're probably not going to know how to negotiate it anyway, or what all the contracts mean, right? And so, no real benefit in my eyes of a first time, second time, third time home buyer of not using a realtor. Only negatives. So that's, I just wanted to touch on that. Because a lot of people do the mistake of doing it themselves, and then that's how they get screwed. Um, there are some special property considerations for vets that I don't think really apply to other people. And hey, that's why we're all here, right? Some of those, if you're an associate vet, here's what I'm talking about. Where are you going to be working? Like, is this your forever practice? I don't know if that's a thing in this day and age, to be honest. But like, are you going to be working there for the next 5 years, 10 years? If you're not going to be working there in the next 5 to 10 years, and you think you might switch practices at some point, which is pretty common, what are the surrounding hospitals that you know of that have good reputations that you know other techs at and that or other vets at that you'd be wanting to work at? Worst case scenario, if you needed to switch practices, right? Um, this is totally different than somebody who's working remote like me, right? And so before you start your home search, do some soul searching on that. Unlike other types of professions, you could probably find out, if not already know, what of the 10 to 20 potential employers are there for you in your city without moving, right? And so you want to buy a house where the top three, the top two, the top five are relatively close to. Because what would suck is you buy the home that you think is the best fit, but you didn't consider where it's in relation to your practice. Now you have an hour commute, and so you're going to show up to work tired, more cranky. You're less productive, so you see two less patients a week on average. You take longer with your notes. That could cost you at least 500 to $1,000 a week if you have an hour commute time that you don't need. And what if you change practices and now all of a sudden you're stuck with the home? And now the other practice that you wanted to go for is an hour away. Obviously, no one has a crystal ball, so you can't plan perfectly for it, but it is a much stronger consideration than someone who could work remote. It just is. On the relief vet, mobile surgeon side of things, well, again, time is money. If you buy a home that is 60 miles away from the top five hospitals that you serve, that means you can't serve them as much. You're going to make less money, and it's not going to be as fun, right? So just remember, on the relief vet mobile surgeon side of things, time is money, and just keep that as a consideration. Practice owner. This one's a little self-explanatory. If you're a practice owner, unless you're trying to sell, within the next few years, probably a long-term commitment to that. You probably want a home that's not a terrible commute away from your practice. That's all that is. But again, all these different things, depending on the type of vet you are, location does matter in a different way than someone who is in a career that they could work anywhere at any point, anywhere, right, from home. Or if they're in a career that, they can't just Google the top 10 places where they're likely to work over the next 10 years, right? That is a very vet specific thing. I can't do that. So we might have another presentation altogether on real estate investing strategies specifically for veterinarians, because there are entire podcasts with thousands of episodes discussing real estate investing. A lot of this presentation is on that first or second home purchase, right? Talking mostly about primary residences. right? And so this might be a whole other presentation that we want to do if you guys want. And I could talk forever about it. Real estate investing, not just buying your primary residence. Some things to take away from this presentation: house hacking. It's great for veterinarians, meaning, and it's great for everybody, really. You buy a place, and you rent, maybe it's a duplex, triplex, quadplex, something with more than one unit, and you rent out the unit that you don't live in. You can still buy it with 0 to 5% down, right? And then you get the rental income, and it's great. It's not for everybody because now you have to live with a tenant, and not everybody wants that. I would love to do this for myself. My wife doesn't want a tenant. If I was single, I would do that in a heartbeat. And it's very low risk compared to a lot of other investing strategies. Primary residence conversions, another great thing to consider. Talk with your financial planner about it before doing it for tax reasons. But if you're trying to build your rental empire, right, some things to consider is if you go buy a new investment property, it's harder to qualify for. The rate sucks. You're going to have to put 15 to 20% down at least, even if you're a physician. And it's just really expensive in any market versus if you buy your primary residence, live in it for a year or more, and then buy a new primary residence and then rent out the soon to be old one. The end result is now you have a rental property and it had that primary residence mortgage rate on it. And for the new home, you only had to put 0 to 5% down, maybe, right? Paid less in closing costs, got a better rate, so it's still the same payment. A lot of good pros in it. There's some cons too, but it's just something to keep in the back of your head. To start real estate investing, you don't need to buy investment properties necessarily. You might just need to buy a new primary. That's it. And it saves you 50 grand, let's say, because you didn't have to put 20% down. So those are just some things to consider. With popular demand, we'll come back with some more nitty-gritty stuff. And the last thing on this slide that I want to touch on is when you are thinking about real estate in general, and why it's good to work with pros who you can rely on, is what's the highest and best use of your time. A lot of people see a real estate YouTube video and think it's the only way to financial freedom. And don't get me wrong, it is a great way to financial freedom. But as a veterinarian, your time is worth more than the average person. It just is. The average person doesn't make 140 to 200,000 a year as an associate, right? I'm talking to you associate vets, as business owners, maybe you make even way more than that, right? There is a lot of income potential for veterinarians that I don't think you guys get enough credit for. My wife thought she was making 80K out the gate a year, because that's what her vet school told her. That was so wrong. And so the whole point there is when you have a great income because you're a veterinarian, well, your time is worth a lot of money, right? Does it make more sense to buy the fixer that's going to take 40 hours of your time learning how to do something? That's going to take another 40 hours of research on contractors to not get screwed. And it's going to take another 100 hours of your time, making sure that the job gets done right. Right. And maybe add another 100 hours in there because you've never done like a super fixer before, right? There's a lot to learn in real estate. Maybe it's a great strategy for some people to make another 40 to 50K in equity off the bat. But if you foregone 300 hours of time that you could be working on your practice, that you could be doing more relief shifts, that you could be seeing more patients, you're probably in the negative, and plus a lot more stress. So that's just something to keep in the back of your head, is don't let the cool real estate investing strategy dictate what you're doing. You have to compare the potential returns with what if you just did what you already do more. That's not a thing that most professions can say. So keep that in the back of your head. And so another thing, let's say you're ready to make the offer, right? And I'll try to wrap this up with 5 minutes to go, and maybe we can stay a few extra minutes for some Q&A. But some other things to keep in mind: the list price doesn't matter, because, and this is just a common noob mistake, the seller is going to get as much as they can for it. They want market value, right? If all the comps, meaning all the comparable sales over the past month for the property that you want, sold for 800,000, 780, 820, and somebody lists their home for sale, that's the same 3-bed, 2-bath, rough same square footage in the same neighborhood as all those comparable sales, and they list it for 1.2 million for no good reason, it's going to sit until they either take it off the market or lower the price. If they, list that home where all the comparable sales over the past month say 800,000 or 780 to 820, and they list it for 600, you're going to go find it and think, oh my God, I just found the best deal ever. I'm going to make an offer on it. What's going to happen? Everybody else is going to think that too. And it's going to bid up. They're going to get multiple offers and it's going to get bid up to 800,000 at least. Right. And so it is a marketing tactic to list a property under market. So that way you get a bidding war. And then some sellers just don't want to admit what their house is worth. So they tell their realtor to list it more than it's worth, and then it sits. And so no matter whether we're in a hot market or a slow market, just know when you're looking at list prices on Zillow, the list price actually doesn't matter. I experienced this myself when my wife and I, we put offers on 4 different properties. The third one, we thought we found a great deal. It was listed for like 920. We didn't know why. We're like, this is worth at least $1 million, at least. So you know what? We're gonna offer 80 or we're gonna offer 60 grand above ask, right, to secure the deal because hey, we're offering 60 grand above the asking price. Well, guess what? We lost out. There were 13 offers, and the winning offer was 1.05, and that's what the comps supported. So it's and you could do that with any purchase price range. That's just to say, when you're looking at Zillow and you get excited about a particular purchase price, just know everybody else probably just got excited about it too, and that's not what it's going to go for. So just keep that in mind. Something to also keep in mind: cash to close. This is the phrase that every lender will use, and it's what you really care about. Everybody talks about the down payment or lack thereof, but that's not how much money you need to bring to the closing table. Cash to close is how much money you actually need to pay to complete the transaction. So this includes your down payment, and it includes any and all closing costs, which for this discussion, closing costs, just anticipate roughly 10 grand. Might be 8, it might be 12, and you won't know until you get there. And it depends on a lot of different variables. But just factor into your own budgeting in the back of your head right now, you're going to need at least 10 grand for closing costs. Just period, end of story. Except if you do this one cool strategy, which I'll talk about at the end, which might get you out of some closing costs. Also, not included in the cash to close, but is something that you need to consider along with your financial planner is, hey, you don't want to be like left at zero after the transaction. We want you to have 3 to 6 months reserves. We want you to have money ready to go for furnishing, for improvements, for moving costs, right? A lot of people don't factor that in, but it could be 5 to 10 grand right there. So just keep that in the back of your head too.
Yeah,
So
for
here,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah, David, that's the biggest mistake that I see is just, people not planning for those other expenses and there's that common expression about being house poor, and
yeah,
that's exactly it.
yeah. Buying real estate can be the greatest wealth builder, but even at 0 down or 3% down, it takes more money than you think you need to do it the right way. Even if you don't end up using it, then that's how you stay safe and that's how you make money long run. Somehow, having more cash than you think you need, even if you don't use it, ends up saving you money in real estate one way or another. If anything, it just makes you a stronger negotiator. Um, Seller credits. This is a lending term, but it's super important. Let's see. I'm gonna do some really cool math real quick that I didn't get to do in the first presentation that I think you guys are really gonna like. I'm not gonna spend more than 5 minutes on it though. Let's say, because this is an easy nugget to keep in the back of your head that might save you $15,000. Let's say you're buying a home for 500 grand. Let's say we're putting, just to keep the math simple, let's say we're putting 10% down, just to keep the math simple. But this applies towards any down payment or lack thereof. So cash to close, including 10 grand of closing costs, it's going to be about 60 grand. That's what we need to complete the transaction. And the monthly mortgage payment, not including taxes and insurance, would be about 3 grand, assuming a 7% interest rate, 30-year fixed. Let's just assume that. Now, what if you get a really good realtor and you have a good LO and you all work well together, you're a strong offer, you do everything right, your loan officer pitches your financing to the seller realtor to like get your offer accepted, like you're a strong buyer, and you're able to negotiate 15 grand off this purchase price, whether it be because the home inspection came back and there was a 15 grand but they're willing to cover it, or you were able to negotiate it out of the gate, right? Because they overlisted the property, maybe it's worth 485, right? So the question here is what the noob would do is they would just lower the purchase price by 15 grand. What the pro does is if you're able to negotiate that, whether it's 10 grand, 20 grand, whatever, is you use a seller credit instead. And here's the difference. If you just take the strong negotiation that you had and lower the purchase price by 15 grand, well, remember, the mortgage payment was about 3 grand before that you did that, and you needed 60 grand to close. All that happens because we're using financing is your down payment just went down by $1,500, not 15,000, 1,500. It only went down like 700 bucks if we're putting 3% down. So you don't save much on the down, which means, and the closing cost didn't change. So that kind of stays the same. And the mortgage payment, well, yeah, your loan balance went down by 10-ish grand, but mathematically your payment only went down by less than 100 bucks per month. Okay. What if instead you took a 15 grand seller credit, kept the purchase price the same, so the seller doesn't care. They're getting the same amount of money. But what a seller credit is you get to use that towards your closing costs. And if you have more seller credit than closing costs, you get to buy down your interest rate, pay for a lower interest rate, a below market rate on the seller's dime to make your rate lower, to also lower your mortgage payment. And so what ends up happening in this example, which does happen fairly common even in this market, I've used it plenty of times, is hey, keep the purchase price the same, 10% down, so your down payment's the same. Cash to close is now 50 grand. Why? Because you use $10,000 of that to cover all your closing costs. So now we have $8,500 left in our pocket. And what did we use the extra $5,000 for? We got 1/8% lower in the interest rate, 1/4% lower in the interest rate. So instead of a 7%, we got a 6.875, for example, or a 6.75. And that keeps the mortgage payment even at the higher purchase price, in this example, within $10 to $20 if you just lower the purchase price. So you still get the same mortgage payment, roughly, but you saved $8,500, which is better. Now you could go max out a backdoor Roth for yourself. Ooh, and that's worth, do the math, hundreds of grand in retirement tax free, right? So that's my point with that. Prioritize, in many cases, seller credit over purchase price reduction. Let me do this. Boom. So let's say you get the house under contract. What do we do next? Well, we didn't even touch the surface. That's a whole other presentation there. How to read loan estimates, how to negotiate once you're under contract, how to do future real estate investing strategies, what to do after you close, right? We can talk about putting houses in trust or whatever. There's a lot more to talk about that we don't have time for, and I do want to answer some of your questions. So we might have another presentation. Goal-based financial, okay, so this slide, as much as I love talking about real estate, there is a reason I'm doing this, right? Besides that, we do want to work with you as much as possible, right? I want to work with as many veterinarians as possible, and to help as many people as possible. So hopefully this did provide some value. I think it is it is important to have, so shameless plug for ourselves. I think it is really important to have a financial planner for everyone, but also specifically a financial planner who knows a thing or two about real estate, because 50% of people want to buy a home, 90% of veterinarians want to buy a home, and 90% should. But it's pretty rare to get a financial planner who's also a student loan expert, who's also a real estate expert. And so you, by working with us, you do have a team out there who are pro financial planners, who are pro at real estate, who are also pro at student loans. That's really rare. I've never seen it before. So that's my pitch to work with us. And specifically on the vet side too, if you don't have a financial planner, who knows what ProSal is? Who knows how to set up a business in the best way, to save the most on taxes if you're a traveling surgeon, but still to qualify for the home, right? Who knows a thing or two about who is expert at student loans, which is something that 90% of veterinarians deal with, 99%. Um, you know, as I already discussed on the housing portion of this, right? There are specific financial needs, wants, and goals, opportunities, and pitfalls that veterinarians need to keep an eye out for. And that's was just on the housing portion. Everything, retirement, student loans, housing, kids' college, whatever it is, future real estate investing. Having a financial planner who understands the veterinary profession and is an expert on it will only help you achieve your financial needs, wants, and goals sooner rather than later. And that's all I got. So here's the booking link. If you're watching us on YouTube at this point in the presentation, hit the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff. Sorry, I've always wanted to say that, but there's the booking link. Meredith just put it in the chat. We have some time at the end. I'm willing to stay an extra 5 to 10 minutes to do some Q&A if we have time. But
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, let's definitely do some Q&A. Yeah. Yeah, and so financial planning with SLP Wealth, so it is $99 a month. So you won't find another deal out there that is at that price. That's a fantastic price for financial planning in general, but not only that, you would get us as veterinary specific financial planners who also have a lot of student loan awareness as well. And so if you follow that link, what'll happen is if you have student loans and you haven't had a consult with Student Loan Planner previously, you'll be directed to schedule a student loan consult first for $100 off, and then you would sign up for the financial planning onboarding meeting. If you've already had a consult with Student Loan Planner before, then you would just be directed to schedule the financial planning meeting. Yeah, and so let's go ahead and let's get into some questions. But yeah, I mean, we help with, of course, David's a mortgage expert. And so, but I mean, we help with everything related to finances, right, David? So like investments, retirement planning, budgeting, cash flow planning, all kinds of things on the veterinary specific side, like knowing about the compensation structures. I think it's a really important thing that not everybody knows about. Being able to help with contract negotiations and things like that, and plan for the irregular incomes that most vets have. And so yeah, so let's get into the questions. So Juanita was asking about the FHA 203K loans, and what do you think about
Yeah.
those?
Yeah, I'm reading. You guys have a lot of good questions. So on that one, so an FHA 203K loan, what that is, it's a rehabilitation loan, meaning you find a property that, needs a lot of work that typically, and if you find a property that's a true fixer, like has foundation issues, it doesn't just need a repaint, it needs a lot of work, it needs $100,000 of work. Typically, most lenders won't lend on that. You need to have it in livable condition first. But an FHA 203K loan, what that is it's a specific product for that fixer upper, and they will finance all or a portion of the renovation cost. My thoughts on it. So that's what it is. My thoughts on it for veterinarians is if you're going to go that route, one, only a limited number of lenders offer that. Not a lot do. Everybody offers an FHA loan, like the 3.5% down, go purchase a regular primary residence. It's harder to find those types of lenders for the rehabilitation loans. Um, and they can be great, but if you're going to do that, I'd want to say you know how to value property, like as good as an appraiser, basically. You know how to do a renovation, right? You're a handy person yourself, right? You know how to vet contractors. You know a thing or two about real estate, or you're willing to put in the effort to learn. And I come back to that, what's your time worth, right? If you already know all that stuff and you're an expert and you want to become the real estate expert and you're okay spending the time and doing the due diligence, yeah, it could be a great investment. But for those who they don't have a passion for finance or they don't have a passion for real estate valuation or being, a contractor, I don't think it's worth your time. I would rather you buy a good home in a good area. Maybe just it's a cosmetic fixer, so you need to spend 15 grand on paint to increase the value by 40 grand, right? You don't need an FHA 203K loan for that. And that's another great way to increase your ROI. So I would just be, what's your time worth, basically? And is it worth going down that rabbit hole? For some people, yes. For some people, no. Other questions. Meredith, do you want to throw another question at me, or do you want me to pick some
Yeah,
questions?
yeah. Laura had asked a question earlier, as a relief vet, and just talking about, okay, what is like how exactly is income considered if you're a relief vet? Like, are they looking at your 1099 income, or and then how is like, are they looking at your tax return, and then how do they take write-offs into account? So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, great question. So there's two different ways you can really set yourself up as being a relief vet. One is your pure 1099. Um, there is no S corp, and everything is on your personal tax return. There is no business tax returns, right? They're gonna look at your tax returns. That's the main thing. How long you've been a relief vet will determine how many tax returns they need. Sometimes you can get away with the most recent year if your LO knows what they're doing, and depending on the loan product, if they pick the right one, sometimes they need 2 years. And it's going to be based off of the net income. So like that's where you have to be careful of writing off more than like you need to. Is if you write off 50 grand, that might be 50 grand less in income that they could use to qualify. The math doesn't work out that exact. There's some fancy equations and stuff that the underwriters will use, but that's what you need to know is, yeah, be careful if you're a 1099 relief vet, you know, be careful what that net income looks like on your Schedule C on your tax return. That's what they're looking at. Um, if you're a relief vet who's also, set up as an S corp, they're going to look at your business tax returns too, your S corp returns. And there's a whole bunch of crazy math in that, and I won't get into it now, but the same idea applies. You're never going to be hurt of investing in like, a solo 401k or a SEP IRA, or, lowering your taxable income to save on taxes and to also save on your student loan payments through retirement planning. But writing off other stuff, S Corp 2 side, that can also hurt your income qualification. The math is too complicated for me to do right now for an example, but you get the idea. Does that answer the question?
Mhm. Yeah, and so there's a couple of questions that are about, student loans and debt to income ratio, and can you just expand on how do lenders look at student loans when they are evaluating debt to income ratio for buying a home?
It changes. Back when everything was in the COVID pause, they would either take let's see, sorry, I'm just reading other questions. They would take, either 1% of the balance or 0.5% of the balance, depending on the loan, not even just the loan type, but depending on whether they use Freddie Mae or sorry, Fannie Mae. I keep on flip mixing that. Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, which are both conventional loans. So it gets really complicated. Depends on if you're in forbearance or not. If you're not in forbearance, like most people aren't anymore, they're going to use what's on your credit report, unless your LO knows how income-driven repayment plans work, right? And so many times, you can use your actual income-driven repayment plan payment, but sometimes you can't if it's zero. It gets complicated. But long story short, what you probably don't want to do is be in the standard 10-year plan if your income-driven repayment plan could be lower, right? So a common strategy is, even if you're going for payoff and not forgiveness, which have a student loan consult with us, we'll tell you our recommendations on that. But even if you're going for payoff because you make too much, well, if you're in the standard 10-year plan, which is probably the highest payment possible that you could see on your credit report, that might hurt your debt to income ratio. And you might tell the underwriter, well, yeah, you're willing to pay that much to be aggressive with your student loans, but they look at that as you have to pay that much. So maybe you choose a different payment plan like the extended graduated or the standard 30-year to get your payment lower on your credit report. And if it still makes sense from a financial planning standpoint to make extra payments on your student loans, and do so, but then that'll lower your debt to income ratio because of what it populates on your credit report. So short answer, you want the lowest monthly payment possible, basically. Longer answer, it gets complicated. And what you should pay on your student loans versus how it works for qualifying for a mortgage is not always the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there a debt to income ratio calculator you can recommend, or is it really like it's not
Oh,
gonna, there's not one that can really give you the answer you need?
I would just get with a good lender, get with a good loan officer. I don't have one to give out. The reason being is because even if there was a great one, which I'm sure there is out there, it's only as good as the person putting in the inputs, right? And so no matter how much research you do, you don't know what your qualifying income is. You don't, unless you've done 20 loans before, right? So I don't have any good resources for that other than find a good loan officer who can then tell you what your debt to income ratio is. And you don't need to buy a property to do that. Like, that's why you should find a good loan officer 6 to 12 months before you're even looking to start looking to buy. So that way you can ask them all those questions for free. What else do we got here? Um, Mind if I take a couple questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
So difference between 15-year conventional with slightly lower rate versus 30-year conventional while making extra payments per year to roughly equate to the same amount of money putting towards the mortgage as the 15-year conventional, 5% down on it. Thank you. This has been super helpful. Um, I don't know what the question is there, other than maybe what my recommendation is. I always like going, unless you're getting an absurd deal on the interest rate with the 15-year, which in this market you're generally not. Like maybe it's a 0.5% difference at most. And the more you decide to make extra payments on your mortgage, the less the interest rate matters in the first place, because it all goes towards principal, anything above the minimum payment. I like going for the 30-year fix instead of the 15, because you're probably going to refi in a few years anyway. Why stick yourself with a higher minimum monthly payment in case stuff hits the fan? You need to pay for, a new car, medical expenses. It's easier to qualify for. And if you want to go ahead and pay it off in 15 years, just make the extra payments accordingly. You can get with your financial planner to see, oh, if I make X payments per month on my mortgage, how fast will I pay it off? It's a super easy calculation. And you could pay off a 30-year fixed in 10 years if you wanted to, or instantly. So I like the 30-year fix for that. 15 years also hard to qualify for. Let's see, what do we,
All
how
right.
much, Meredith, how much time do we got left? We have time for one or two more questions at least.
I think so, if you're up for it.
Cool. Let me take a
Yeah.
look. I saw some good questions earlier.
So yeah, there's a couple of good ones in the Q&A. So one is how do you prove your income as a new grad? Like are you just using your are you just giving them your contract or the letter to do that? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so super easy. If you're an associate vet, which is kind of how the question's framed, right?
Mhm.
contract and everything. It is easier than if you immediately started being a full-time relief vet. Uh, if you're employed W-2, the second you get out of school and get that employment contract, you can use that income. Now, should you is a different question. Maybe you should get to know your area more. Maybe you should get your emergency reserves together, right? Maybe wait a few months to focus on, because when you're a new grad, that first 6 months of practicing it's gonna be a whirlwind, most likely. It's gonna be drinking like a fire hose. It's really drinking like a fire hose for the first 2 years, and even then after, right? But that first 6 months especially. So good news, you can technically use that income, like at least your base to qualify, the second you graduate if you're an employee. Don't worry about the specific documentation. Just know it's really easy, basically.
All right, cool. And then piggybacking on that, what documents would you recommend being armed with when you're like just starting the home buying process? Like what should somebody already have together versus what things are people going to kind of help them with along the way?
Like what docs should they have ready to go for like a loan officer who's going to ask for
Mhm.
stuff?
Yep.
If you're the associate vet or the employee vet, just anticipate they're going to need most recent month's worth of pay stubs. They're going to want the most recent 2 years of W-2s as applicable. If you're a new grad, that doesn't really apply. That's okay. It's just, and they're not going to use that 2021 W-2 as your income. It's for other reasons that have nothing to do with what they're going to calculate, but they're going to ask for it. So W-2s, pay stubs. If you're an associate vet, you don't need your tax return. It's a common misconception. Even if they ask for it, they really shouldn't. Um, that's really it. So it should be really easy for the W-2 borrowers. For the self-employed borrowers, our S corps, our business owners, our relief vets, have your tax returns ready to go. That's the big thing. There's going to be other little things depending on your exact circumstance, right? But those are the big things: pay stubs, tax returns, if you own any property, mortgage statements, homeowners insurance, all that kind of stuff. Let's see here. Yeah, someone had a question about looks like you already answered it. Does DTI factor in past debt or current debt? Meredith already answered in the chat, but for anybody who missed it, it's current debt. So if you paid off an auto loan a year ago, yeah, it's on your credit report, but that does not negatively impact you. In fact, it helped. A lot of auto loans kill mortgages. So pay off that auto loan. Um, let's see here. I think we have time for at least one more. Meredith, do you see any great questions that we didn't get to?
Um, yeah. Did we get to Brittany's question about just like buying with a spouse and just, anything that any tips that you might have of like buying on your own versus with a spouse?
Hmm. Just like general tips and things to think about?
Hmm.
Well, I mean, it depends on your relationship, right? I'm going to assume in that question that it's all one household, it's one. Really, when you're buying a home with the one, I don't think you should ever buy a home with anybody but your spouse. Either buy it by yourself because you're single or buy it with a spouse. Don't be single and buy it with significant other. My opinion, I've seen a lot of horror stories. Now, some things to consider when buying with a spouse, it's some people keep separate finances, right? Separate bank accounts, whatever. It's fine. Let's see here. Sorry, I was reading more of the comments. We have one more good question to get to after this, and then I think we'll end it. But when you're buying with a spouse, even if you keep separate bank accounts, even if you've treated it as separate finances up until this point, in this market especially, unless you have unique circumstances, I would treat everything as combined finances, right? It's all one goal. This is going to be the biggest purchase of your life, most likely. right? And we need everybody's resources to get the job done and to make sure money's going where it needs to go. As far as who to put on the loan, if that's your question, sometimes you can only put one spouse on the loan and have both spouses be on title, on ownership. But anybody who goes on the loan has to be on ownership. And so sometimes, depending on your relationship and depending on what credit scores are, it might make sense to strategically keep the person with the poor credit scores off the loan, put them on title. That gets you a better rate as long as you can still qualify without their income. Sometimes you need both incomes, and so talk with your lender about it. But there is with everything mortgage, it always depends. Sometimes it makes sense to put one person on the loan. Sometimes it makes sense to put both on the loan, and sometimes it doesn't matter. And so, long story short, be a team with your partner and do whatever is willing to take to get the best deal that also makes financial sense. That's it. I think we should wrap this up. Uh, One last question was thoughts about the current housing market, and is it smart to buy with how the rates are? Very easy, at least for me to answer. Um, Buying a house is a long-term play. It just is. In any market, especially when rates are high. If you think there's any chance that you might have to sell the house in 3 years or less, probably doesn't make financial sense to buy. Probably saves a ton of money renting. If you're not sure about the next 3 to 7 years, there is risk. And you might not make money on this home purchase. You might lose money. If you can say, I know I'm going to be in this area long term, this is where I want to plant roots. I don't see any reason why I would sell this in less than 10 years. Or better yet, I plan to keep it forever and grow my rental empire. Then you'll probably make money by buying it. Rule of thumbs, depends on your market area, but that's just to answer that question. Your time horizon matters, not necessarily what the current rate is.
All right. I think that's a great one to end on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
All
look at the
right.
link in the chat to book with us. We'd love to work with you. And we'll make sure to do more stuff like this in the future. Maybe we'll talk real estate investing.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great night.